Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone this morning to the Regional Stormwater Partnership of the Carolinas Post-Construction Stormwater Compliance Winter Workshop. Last I heard, we had over 400 registrants for this morning's workshop, so that's great for a partnership. I'd like to go over today's agenda. First, we're going to hear from Rusty Roselle on the importance of post-construction regulatory control for reducing stream and flooding impacts. Then we'll hear from Paul Clark from DEQ on North Carolina's DEQ's post-construction stormwater requirements. Then Danny Lawson from City of Gastonia on municipality experience with post-construction ordinance development, the evolving of a program. Then we hear from Sean Mayo, designing post-construction stormwater control with maintenance in mind. That's an important subject. Then we hear from Jay Wilson with the City of Charlotte on construction, conversion, and closeout of structural stormwater control measures. Then we hear from Nate Smith with Dragonfly Pond Works on inspection and maintenance of SEMs, requirements, and common issues. And then we'll have a final session where we'll have all our speakers come back and we'll have just a general and answer session. So I guess first we'll introduce Rusty Roselle. First, I guess back up here. Interaction wave, if you have any questions, you can post them on the Zoom and we'll try to answer them as we go along, or when the presenter's done, try to answer the questions. Next slide.
Good morning, everybody. This is Rusty Roselle, and hopefully everybody can hear me. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah. Okay, Rusty, let me go over your bio right quick.
Hey, yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can everybody hear you?
Okay, and are you seeing my presentation?
So let's get started here. I see Rusty Roselle, he manages Mecklenburg County's water quality program with Charlotte Mecklenburg Stormwater Services. The program is charged with maintaining and restoring the quality and usability of Mecklenburg County's surface water resources, including over 3,000 miles of stream in 2 river basins and 190 miles of shorelines in 3 of the 11 lakes that comprise of the Catawba River system. The program partners with City of Charlotte to assist with the phase 1 requirements and responsible for administering the phase 2 permit requirements for 6 of the towns in Mecklenburg County, as well as Charlotte Mecklenburg School, Central Piedmont Community Colony. Rusty has been with Mecklenburg County for 42 years, including 36 years as its water quality program supervisor. We'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Rusty.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me, and hopefully,
right, and
is that true?
Yes, Rusty, can you make it a full slide screen? They're seeing it as a PowerPoint view. Can you make it with the full slide? Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so are you seeing that now, Regina?
No, not yet. Try again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I'm pushing the button.
Okay.
And it's not coming up. Let me stop sharing. Try to do it again.
Well, thanks so much, Rusty. That'll make it easier for everybody to see the full screen view. Everybody appreciate it.
Yeah, let me see. Let me try here now. Got my buddy David Caldwell in here. You know, he's my, that's really a sad.
That's the great thing.
You know, It is a great thing. It's always great. Okay, now let's see here. Share screen. But why in the world I have all these different screens open?
Can you just share your presentation?
Okay, how about now?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Looks great.
Okay, sorry, y'all. Well, there goes 2 minutes of my precious time. I'm sorry. But anyway, thank y'all. I appreciate everybody being here. This is a good group of people. This is very exciting to have everybody hopefully listening. And I'm going to start off by talking about post-construction regulatory controls for reducing stream pollution and flooding. And you and I have a presentation. I like to start off by making sure everybody knows where we are. So what I've done here, this first slide, this is obviously a map of North Carolina. And you can see in the yellow area, I have identified the watersheds that include our jurisdictions. On the right side, you can see the different cities and county that are located within the regional partnership or part of the regional stormwater partnership. And then the counties where these cities and jurisdictions are located in the kind of light blue green in the center of the slide. And you can see that there are really 3 watersheds that our jurisdictions here in the partnership cities fall into, including the Yadkin in the north, the Catawba in sort of the central, and the Broad in the south, and those areas delineated by the red line. So you can see that Iredell, Rowan, Cabarrus, Mecklenburg, Union, and Lancaster all have their jurisdiction draining into portions of their jurisdiction draining into the Yadkin Petey River system, which flows in a southeasterly direction and enters the Atlantic Ocean down there in Winyah Bay in Georgetown. You see just south of that, we've got portions of Mecklenburg, Union, Lancaster, as well as all of Lincoln, Gaston, and part of York that go into the Catawba River system. And of course, the Catawba River system flows south, joins the Wateree, joins the Congaree, joins the Santee and the Cooper flows into the Atlantic Ocean there at Charleston Harbor. And then the smallest watershed, or the watershed that has the smallest jurisdictional area within our partnership, is the Broad River, which is south of the Catawba, that has portions of Cleveland and York County in it. And then, of course, joins with the Broad and the Congaree that ultimately joins with the Catawba. So I think it's important to kind of see where we all lie in this system. One other point that I wanted to try to make in my presentation is all about watershed. So, you know, we're talking about non-point source pollution and impacts flooding. It's all related to impervious cover, and it all ties to the watershed you're in. And I think you all probably very well understand that. The other thing is kind of interesting to note is that Mecklenburg County, as shown here, the entire western border of Mecklenburg County, the entire western border is portions of 3 of the 11 lakes in the Catawba River system, Lake Norman, Mountain Island, and Iredell, as well as York, also have a great deal of area along the shoreline of the Catawba River. Zoom in a little bit here. One of the things that I wanted to try to emphasize is the importance of our surface water resources to all of our partner communities here in the Regional Stormwater Partnership. So I've taken the map in the previous slide, I've zoomed in, and what I've indicated here by these 19 different circles are the locations of drinking water supplies in the rivers. So you can see how very reliant we are on the Catawba River in our region for drinking water supply. So we've got 15 of our 27 communities, well, actually more than that, 15 of the 19, because a lot of these 27 communities in the partnership, they get their drinking water from other communities. So but when you look at where these communities have their drinking water supplies, majority of them have them on the top. So it's a hugely valuable resource because it's the water we drink. To know about the Piedmont of the Carolinas, our region in particular we're talking about today, is that groundwater is not a viable source of drinking water. It just does not provide the yields. So a lot of smaller communities used to rely on groundwater supplies, but as they grow, they have to tie into a surface water source. Maybe they join in with, like Stanley has tied into Mount Holly's drinking water supply. Some other communities have tied into Gastonia's drinking water supply. So we end up, ultimately, as we become more urbanized, we all end up pulling our drinking water from a surface water supply, right? And so this water supplies are what's vulnerable to the pollutions associated with post-construction. And altogether, we're withdrawing about 209 million gallons of water a day from these surface water supplies to provide our communities with their drinking water. Other than as a drinking water supply, obviously these surface water supplies are hugely important for recreation. Duke Energy estimates that about 10 million people visit one of those Catawba River lakes every year, and that is supposed to increase significantly. So the water resources, our surface water resources, are extremely important, obviously. I think y'all probably realize that. Hopefully this is a reminder to you. Also, the biggest threat to our surface water resources is from non-point source pollutants. So if you see here, you can tell that we have sort of a split up picture or image. So if you've got a lawn area, when it rains, obviously pollutants are picked up, fertilizers, herbicides that are applied along, they're carried into the storm drain system. You see a parking lot where oil, antifreeze, any chemical dropped on that parking lot or into the storm drain system. And of course, all of us here within the region have a municipally separate storm sewer system, meaning all of that water runs straight into our creeks. These are called non-point source pollutants. These are the pollutants that are associated with increased impervious area or urbanization, which is our biggest threat to the quality of our surface water resource. And then these are some of the non-point source pollutants that we're talking about. But the other kind of hidden bullet or secret bullet there associated with urbanization is the increased volumes and velocities associated with the increased impervious area. So if you take an acre of trees here in our region, you put an inch of rain on that acre of trees, the trees will soak up that water. A lot of it will settle into the ground, become part of the groundwater supply, but there will be basically no runoff from that 1 inch of rainfall. But if you cut those trees down and put an acre of asphalt, that same 1 inch of rainfall produces 27,000 gallons of runoff. So that 27,000 gallons of added runoff causes the volume and the velocity in our streams, our receiving streams, to increase. Tremendous increases in changes in the natural stream hydrology. The stream has to meander and cut to make room for this added volume and velocity, which scours out huge swaths of dirt in the creek bank. This is one of our creeks up in Hunter Forest, illustrating a 14-foot cutaway of soil. Of course, this soil goes somewhere. It goes downstream. As the water slows down, settles out, varies the habitat for your aquatic organisms. This is a mayfly, benthic macroinvertebrate. So this creek scour, this creek instability is sort of the death blow for organisms downstream. And we believe here in Mecklenburg County, our biggest source of stream impairment is lack of biology. And we have tied that back to predominantly the increase in volume and velocity associated with urbanization, increase in impervious areas. And if it's not already happening in your community, it will happen soon. So to kind of share with you, give you an idea of what we are looking at here in Mecklenburg County when it comes to impervious area or urbanization. This is a map of the county. You see the Catawba River here on our western border. The areas in red represent as of 2020. So in Mecklenburg County, we have right now, as of 2020, 115 square miles of impervious area, which is 22% of the surface area of the county. This is an area about the size of Charleston, South Carolina. we've seen an increase of 70%, 7% over the past 5 years. So you're obviously one of the most rapidly growing areas in the country. And this is certainly demonstrated by the significant increase in impervious area and the largest or the highest percentage of impervious area is located in what we call the upper Little Sugar, which is at 40%. And that's this area here. Briar, which is Briar, Irwin, Lower Little Sugar, and McMullen, which are all greater than 30%. So those are some very, very high percentages of impervious area, and they really cause a lot of negative impacts in and downstream of the watersheds here in Mecklenburg. So 1 inch of rainfall in Mecklenburg County with its impervious area will generate 2 billion gallons of runoff, which is enough water to fill Panther Stadium 8 times. Okay, we get about 44 inches of rainfall a year. This equates to 88 billion gallons of runoff, which would fill Panther Stadium 340 times. That is a lot of water carrying a lot of pollutants, moving real fast and increasing volumes in our streams that were never naturally designed to receive and transport that volume, resulting in a lot of skyward and stream degradation and reduction of aquatic habitats. So let's stop talking about Mecklenburg and let's get back to talking about the region. So looking at the region, I've looked at some of the population data for the region on the far. These are the different counties in our partnership. This axis over here on the left represents the 2019 population estimates. And over here, we've got the 20% increase. So look real quick, and you can see that the prize goes to Union County. So they've had a 105% increase in population over the past 20 years. Then you can see York, and you can see Cabarrus, Mecklenburg. So these counties have experienced tremendous population growth. So what does that mean? Well, obviously what that means, if you have population growth, you have more urbanization, or you have more of an increase in impervious area. Although I don't have the impervious area data for these different counties, I know, and you know too, that there's been an equal or greater increase in impervious area associated with this increase in population. So what does that translate to? So this map, again, we look at the region and we see here in colored in red, these are the impaired watersheds in our region. In other words, the EPA under the 303D section of the Clean Water Act requires, I think it's every 2 years, that a designation has to be made of impaired watersheds. These are watersheds that don't meet water quality standards. And these red areas are generated off that data. So this is data indicating impaired watersheds based off of the Clean Water Act. A lot of these watersheds are impaired for various different reasons. Over here on the right, I show the names of the watersheds and why they're impaired, but I'm not going to get into all of that. I think the point here is that we already have significant impairment, and the primary source of this impairment in the reports is indicated as non-point source pollutants or urbanization. So this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. So the post-construction ordinances that we have in our communities are supposed to serve to control the negative water quality and quantity impacts, the volumes and velocity increases, as well as non-point source pollutants associated with impervious areas. So as I said at the beginning, this has all got to be looked at a watershed perspective. Of course, this is a typical watershed, completely undeveloped. We've got a drainage divide here along the ridge. This is the area of high ground. All the water drains down into a water body. And then there are a number of subbasins or drainage divides within your larger watershed or subwatersheds. So it can be a fairly complicated system, but you go in here, what happens in our communities as we talk with our population increases is you put in more homes, more rooftops, more roads, more parking lots. And as a result of that, you increase impervious area urbanization, and you increase non-point source pollutants, you increase volumes and velocity. So our post-construction ordinances require at a minimum 2 things. One, when you reach a 24% built upon area, impervious area, you have to install engineered controls, stormwater controls, to collect that stormwater, to reduce your volumes and velocities, and to settle out or retreat for your non-point source pollutants. The other thing that the post-construction control ordinances require in a state as a minimum is that you have a 30-foot no build zone along the banks of your receiving stream, receiving body of water. And of course, these no build zones keep the impervious area further away from the stream and to help control the non-point source pollutants. Now, some jurisdictions have wider buffers. Some jurisdictions require stormwater controls at less than 24%. So far, the state's allowing us to be more stringent than the minimum state requirements. Met County has a provision of 12% of requiring stormwater controls, and the Yadkin and the Catawba draining directly into the lake's longest western border. It also has buffers that go all the way up the entire 100 feet or the entire floodplain. So if you have a situation where you have a drinking water supply in that watershed, then all of a sudden it's elevated to a drinking water supply watershed designation, and you have to have water supply watershed protection requirements, which are just more controls added to the post-construction ordinance requirements. For the criteria for inserting stormwater control measures is still greater than 24%. The buffers, however, for greater than 24% are increased from 30 feet to 100 feet, and it's supposed to be undisturbed. I wanted to kind of emphasize a few things about, I want to talk a little bit about the limitations of these post-construction buffers. I think they do a good job, but you need to understand that they don't do the entire job, that other work is needed. And I wanted to try to point that out. One of the limitations of our post-construction ordinances is that in 2018, Senate Bill 469 passed and became Section Law 218-145. It went into effect December 27, 2018. Basically, what it says that you cannot require stormwater controls for pre-existing development when redevelopment occurs. So in Mecklenburg County, we had in our ordinances that as you redevelop, you have to rebuild in compliance with post-construction controls. So if you tore down buildings, when you rebuilt them back, you had to have those structures drain for high density into one of these engineered devices. So that's huge to us because, as I showed in that previous slide, we've got watersheds that are above 40%. Our ordinances went into effect 2007, 2008. So we were well over 30% built upon in most of our water, in a lot of our urban watersheds, and that 30% can never be treated. And a lot of studies, federal studies, like the NERC study that took place in the early 1970s and other studies completed over the past 50 years, show that negative water quality impacts in watersheds begin when you reach about 10 or 12% built upon area that is not treated. So the moral of that story is if you've already got watersheds prior to 2007-8 when your post-construction ordinance went into effect, and they're over 10 or 12%, then you've got negative water quality impacts that you can never remove, that will be there forever because they will never be treated. So you need other tools in your toolbox to address that. The other thing, treatment only removes a certain percentage of pollutants and volumes of velocity, doesn't remove all of it, and treatment systems have to be maintained and ultimately replace at significant costs. Just wanted to point this out because really the best way to preserve and protect watersheds is to prevent areas from developing. So how do you do this? You have tree save requirements, you buy land and put it in conservation. And I think you can never lose sight of that, because that is hugely important to controlling non-point source pollutants and increased volumes and velocities. I wanted to point out this example we have here in Mecklenburg County. This is hard to see. This is a small area in western Mecklenburg County, almost straight due west of downtown Charlotte. This is the Catawba River. You can see here in the yellow line. This is Mountain Island Lake in particular. And this area outlined in red is what we call the Gar Creek watershed. And it drains to Gar Creek Cove, immediately upstream the primary drinking water supply for the city of Charlotte. Now, we have for the past side land in this watershed as part of conservation easements. We've had 1,500 acres in Latta Plantation Nature Preserve. And we've been doing this for a long time. We did it purposefully to protect this code, recognizing that it would impact the drinking water quality. And why I wanted to point this out to you, we monitored this code. We've been monitoring it for 50 years along with the other codes up and down the Catawba River. And we have witnessed in this code that of all the codes that we monitor, it is one code that we have seen the least negative impacts from urbanization. You think that's common sense? It's not common sense. The moral of the story is if you can set aside areas and not develop them, really do the best job in protecting us from the negative impacts of urbanization, far better than post-construction controls. So that is the end of my presentation, and we will hold questions to the end. Thank y'all. Sorry for the rough start. Never knew why I always have rough starts on these things, but there you go.
You did great, Rusty. We really appreciate your taking time to share your expertise and this importance for our water quality. Our next speaker will be Paul Clark. After graduating, Paul worked in consulting for a few years prior to beginning work at the NCDEH-NER, now NCDEQ. Paul worked in the public water supply, the NPDES wastewater pretreatment, the Department Customer Service Center, one-stop permitting office, the Raleigh Regional Office, and in planning use restoration watershed program. Prior to working for Stormwater, Paul is the water supply watershed coordinator, but assists in other aspects of the stormwater program. Thanks so much, Paul, for being here today.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Yes, good morning, everyone. I'll preface this conversation by stating, as Regina mentioned, I'm the Water Supply Watershed Protection Coordinator. In the Stormwater branch, we do a lot of different things, so we share responsibilities. There are some other key staff members who are the primary post-construction folks. I'm going to try to do as good a job as I can presenting the post-construction requirements, to try to answer as many questions as I can, although I may have to defer to some other staff folks who are just more familiar. But with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Let's see, page down. Okay, hold on, let's see. You can see, can you see my screen?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, it's not, for some reason, it's not advancing though. Let's see, let me try this. Here's my, again, let's see. Let me try something else here. Let's see.
So Paul, I think if you roll a little wheel on your mouse, maybe it'll advance.
Oh, there, thank you. Okay, thank you, appreciate it. All right, I'm going to just talk briefly about stormwater ordinances, just because, as Rusty mentioned, when you're dealing with post-construction requirements, it's very common to go ahead and incorporate those comments within an ordinance of some type. So first, why even develop ordinance? Well, there are requirements at the general statute level. That's that first bullet. There are also ordinance requirements within the program requirements themselves, which I'll share on the next slide. And then I think for most local governments, it just makes it easier, more efficient, maybe more effective to be able to implement these post-construction stormwater requirements using the structure, using the tool of the ordinance to facilitate review, maintenance, inspection, and program. There are a few different types of ordinances. Some communities have the Unified Development Ordinance, which is pretty much all inclusive or subdivision. And then just at the bottom are just some other common ordinances that are used by local governments as well. The first two bullets here actually are requirements within these particular sections that pertain to the ordinances in the stormwater, water supply, watershed protection programs. The last two bullets are actually informational bullets. And the reason that I included them is because it's often useful for a local government to be able to group, to be able to have those issues that are more similar to each other, water related, or I've got flooding and erosion control as well, to group them in the same area to just make it easier to find things and that type of thing. So the last two are just two sections that may be close to your stormwater section and may be related to that. Whoops, I skipped one by accident. Okay, just one item which I'm sure most, if not everyone, is aware for local governments in terms of a recent update in terms of ordinance development, and that is the Session Law 2020-25, which was to become effective July of this past year. Basically, it was mainly an organizational improvement. As it says here, it consolidated some statutes. It's put these statutes in a format that was more logical, more coherent, made it easier to find things, and then it's more consistent with at the same time. So a more consistent format with at the same time though allowing still flexibility and for the local governments in implementing these ordinances. All right, what I'll start with actually is there are certain exceptions that you don't always have to implement post-construction requirements. You don't always have to have a post-construction requirements in place for every single activity. So this slide here identifies some of the key types of projects that do not require post-construction ag and silviculture. That's forestry, some NCDOT linear transportation projects. And then airport facilities. And then the last item here, redevelopment, which the next slide, I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that because I think Rusty mentioned a little bit about redevelopment in his presentation, but some people can get a little bit confused when they talk about development and redevelopment and BUA, net change, and all those different things. I'll try to summarize it on this slide right here. So as the slide indicates, development results in a decrease in infiltration of precipitation into the subsoil, even if there's no change in decrease in BUA. And then redevelopment, you have to meet the two key conditions that are listed here. Not a cause of net increase in BUA, and then provide greater or equal to stormwater control than pre-development. So I hope this slide helps when you're making decisions about whether requirements for. And then there's also, that was the exception category. Now I'll talk about a little about the prior authorization category. So as it says here, project does not have to comply if it has a valid, unexpired, unrevoked, non-terminated authorization obtained prior to the effective date of the rule. So these are also building permits and site-specific development plans, phase development plans. These are all examples of prior authorizations where, again, you may not have to necessarily then apply post-construction requirements for that particular project. This, I'm not going to be able to really have time to look at the map, but this is on our website. And this is the map of North Carolina, as you can see, and it's color coded. And by clicking on the map, it will identify the post-construction stormwater program or programs that are applicable to your particular area. If I have time at the end, I'll come back. I just want to make sure I get through my slides. So post-construction, there's some key requirements that pertain to all of the different post-construction stormwater requirements. You have to do your project density calculation. There are certain things that you're supposed to meet in terms if you have a low density project, which are listed right here. And then if you have the greater percentage of impervious cover, and so you're moving into the high density category, there are the requirements that are listed here as well. Again, I think most people know, but SCM, that's the stormwater control measures. And the last bullet here, that you have to meet minimum design criteria for your stormwater control measures. And vegetated setbacks, I think Rusty mentioned this a little bit within his presentation as well. The key thing that people may not be aware, maybe you are, is that they can be graded and replanted. They don't necessarily have to remain in their natural existing pre-development existing state. And then here the BUA, basically this says that the treated stormwater has to pass through the vegetated setback, and it cannot be piped through it or under it. I guess that's the purpose of that second bullet there in terms of vegetated setbacks. There are certain cases where there can be streams that are allowed in the vegetated setback, and those are listed here in terms of the roads, greenways, sidewalks, water dependent structures, and then poles and that type of thing. Okay, well, I mentioned the same thing again, that the stormwater should be discharged through the vegetated setback, not, I mean, it goes through it, not bypassing it, essentially. All right, these are two other basic requirements associated with the post construction. You have your stormwater outlets, which are not to cause erosion downslope. I'm sorry, discharge point for 10 year, and then the deed restrictions as well. And as we all know, the basic reason for those is to be able to ensure protection, not just for a temporary, but a more permanent, ongoing span of time. Whoops. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch upon the different stormwater programs that require post-construction. I think most of you here are familiar with the Phase 2 MS4 program. We've got about 120 MS4s in North Carolina. You can be designated by the federal census data, or you can be designated at the state level. You could be a municipality that has a potential adverse impact on water quality, or again, these population and housing criteria that if they are met, we would fall in. And then there's also a chance to be petitioned. You could be included by petition. MS4 program, to get the permit, you have to have your stormwater management plan, include 6 minimum control measures. Post-construction is one of those 6 minimum measures. But it's important to note, you can use a qualified program. You can, if one or more of other post-construction stormwater requirements fall within your jurisdiction, you can use one or more of those programs to meet your post-construction requirements for your MS4 permit. There's the coastal. Again, we're not at the coast here, but in case there's folks who are listening who maybe who deal in the coast, there's the post-construction coastal program. It covers the 20 coastal counties, which are shown on the map here. I'll say each slide I try to provide the link at pertinent regulation. For the coastal, how you apply this, if you disturb an acre or more of land, or if you have to obtain a Coastal Area Management Act, a CAMA permit, or if you meet these built upon area drainage to SA water requirements, then you would have to look at meeting the coastal post-construction stormwater program. And these are the density, the high density, low density requirements associated with the post-construction post-construction stormwater program. We also have the non-coastal high quality water. In this case, again, disturb an acre or more of land, but in this case, there's the and also 1 mile draining to high quality water. The exception is water supply 1 and 2. I'm going to talk about that program in a slide or two. That's another post-construction stormwater program. And then again, draining to outstanding resource waters. These are the associated high density, low density requirements for the non-coastal ORW high quality water program. The water supply watershed protection program, as it says right there, if all or part of your jurisdiction lies within either a water supply watershed protection critical area, watershed, or protected area, you have to abide by the water supply watershed protection requirements. This is the table. Again, Rusty he was referring to this a little bit because Mecklenburg County and Charlotte's in the 24%, which you see at the bottom of this table. There are other classifications that fall within the water supply watershed program as well, as you can see on this table here. Okay, so this is, let's see. Let me use it, please. Yes, this is what I was saying earlier. I might, unfortunately, let me see. I can't see my top of my slide here. Oh, so this is the, I'm sorry, this is the Universal Stormwater Program. Sorry, I can't reach my heading on my own slide because of the tab that's up there. The Universal Stormwater Program, there's only about 6 of them currently in North Carolina that utilize this program, but it is a way to simplify your post-construction stormwater requirements in that you can use the Universal Stormwater Program in place of the program's construction requirements. Please note the nutrient management strategy programs do not are not eligible for the Universal Stormwater Program, so you can't use those. And now I'm going to move to moving to the next program. Let's see, cannot be used to satisfy. Oh yeah, this is something to note too. So as many of you are probably aware, you may be having to meet more than one post-construction stormwater requirement within your jurisdiction. If you have more than one post-construction program, and let's say you're not simplifying them using the universal program, for instance, you would abide by the more stringent requirement. I mean, maybe that's logical, but that's just that's in rule. And this is just a note. I'm going to be moving to the nutrient in a second. Some notes about the nutrient management programs. So NUS and TAR-PAM, 2 of the oldest nutrient management strategies. In order for those to become active, you have here again, it has to do with land disturbance. It has to do with built upon area, whether your development is part of a common planted development or an isolated lot. And then I did residential. These are the commercial requirements here for the NUS and the TAR-PAM. I also note NUS for the Neuse River Basin, again, because we've got a Falls Lake, I'll get to that in a slide or two. These are requirements for those parts of the Neuse that are outside of the Falls Lake watershed, since it has its own program. There's also a Randleman Lake program that's, again, directed, related to water supply watershed. For the upper reservoir, you just abide by your water supply watershed protection WS4 rules. But for the lower part of the watershed, you have associated with low density and high density. Now we have Jordan Lake, again, another nutrient management strategy area. Here, again, you can see the requirements are associated with the nutrient limitations associated with this area. And there, again, these can be complicated. I'm running out of time, but basically there's this requirement for new development, and then for existing development, it's more of an adaptive management approach. You try to implement some existing things, you monitor, and then see if more requirements are needed. Okay, let's see. Again, more requirements here associated with next program. Sorry, I'm just running out of time. Oh, yeah, sorry. This is the Falls. Yeah, this Falls Lake watershed. Again, it's similar to Neuse, but there are some differences in terms of disturbance and meeting nutrient requirements. A key thing to note, and this goes back to the water supply watershed program, is that there's an option called the 1070 option within the water supply watershed program. That is, you're not allowed to use that within the Falls Lake watershed because of the nutrient requirements, nutrient requirement program associated with the Falls Lake watershed. We also have an area that's actually closer to the Charlotte Goose Creek, that's 6 Mile and Waxhaw Creek watersheds. Again, this was done, you may all know, to protect the heel splitter, the Carolina heel splitter. But again, they have their own program for that area. Again, if you disturb more an acre, result in BUA, you have to implement the post-construction requirement in this area. Finally, there are also post-construction requirements associated times with the 404, the 401 program. Anytime you impact a North Carolina water or wetland, the Army Corps will determine the type of 404 permit needed. They work with the state in determining the type of 401 water quality certification. There are several different water quality certifications, but associated with those certifications, there are stormwater management plan conditions, and that's where the post-construction element falls within the 404, 401 program. Just wanted to state briefly, this is a post-construction stormwater update. It allows for, as it says, some permit transfer capabilities. It also has a requirement for requiring annual certifications. As you can see, this is a very new requirement, and EQ stormwater and how we're going to implement this with the different folks to which it applies. But this is just, you know, it's out here and we're working on implementing this new requirement. This is just a few months old. Yeah, this is just some more information on this new session law. As I said, I provide contacts. Jim Farkas is the main central office post-construction review engineer. It's just Jim right now. Some of you may know Corey. He left about a couple of months ago. In the Washington Regional Office of Samir, it is Christine. And then I also included the nutrient contacts as well. I had a lot of information. I'm sorry, I went over as it was. And so please, I'll be happy to try to answer questions, but please also feel free to reach out to these folks as well. And they may be even better suited to answer your questions. And thank you. Thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. We really appreciate all the detail you put into it and the links. And hopefully we can post this on the website and you can have those links to link to in the future as people want to follow up. We appreciate that expertise and learning more about the requirements and the regulations there. Our next speaker will be Dana Lawson. He has municipality experiences with post-construction ordinance development. It's about the City of Gastonia evolution of a program. Dana is the Stormwater Utility Administrator for the city, a municipality just west of the city of Charlotte. He has held this position since 2019 and is grateful to be back in the region. Prior to this, he was the District Conservationist in Jacksonville, North Carolina with the USDA NRCS and previously had worked for 15 years with Gaston County's Natural Resources Department. He holds a bachelor's degree from Western Carolina University in Natural Resource Management, a master's in Environmental Assessment from North Carolina State University. And despite his career and academic accolades, his greatest achievement is being a father to twin 4-year-old boys and a 3-month-old daughter, and the husband to a beautiful wife of 16 years. Dana, thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you. Okay, so can you see my screen? I'm doing just.
Yes, we
Real
see your
quick.
final
It looks like we're on the
slide.
last
Screen share. Can you
slide.
see anything or? All right. There you go. So you see my conclusion. I don't need to do anything else. That's perfect.
Great. Wonderful.
All right. Are you seeing full screen now?
We're seeing one with also the next slides beside it. So if you got a different view from a different.
I'm just going to change this real quick. Sorry about that.
It's okay. We appreciate everybody. And
great job. And if we all have technical difficulties and we're doing good, I guess this is par for the course.
It's thanks,
So,
Dana. It's part of the fun.
That's right. That's right. Well, first off, I want to thank you guys for having me. And as my little bio said, I've been in the region for a while and then took about a 4-year hiatus with the federal government. I'm grateful to be back in the area. And it's interesting in Paul's presentation, he had mentioned some of the coastal things that are going on. I certainly saw some of the challenges down there. And like I said, it's pretty good to be back in Gastonia. And I'll throw a little animation there. In the presentation here, for those of you who aren't real familiar with Gastonia, as I said, we are just west of Charlotte. We are close enough to attend the Panthers game or to go to a concert or anything like that. But we're a lot different than Mecklenburg is in a lot of ways. So today, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is the history of our region and how stormwater plays a part in that. Rusty had some really great slides in the beginning, and I love having Rusty go first because I can actually hide some of his data and add it to my PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully you'll see some of this stuff. Gastonia, but Gaston County, particularly Gastonia, has a long history of development within industry. And just to give you a little background on who we are and where we're from, and this may be a similar story for a lot of our communities in the mid or post Civil War era, in the 1870s. There was a small railroad depot that was formed right in a line, the Atlanta and Charlotte Airline, and the railroads really started. Became a high area for budding textile industry in the 1850s as the country underwent redevelopment and reconstruction. And this having these the railroad really brought in about 200 people in an area that was less than a square mile. So if you consider back then, here's a bit of the infrastructure that was around in 1897. This is, you can see that there are some light poles, but there's also we've got some horse and carriage, and then in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Gastonia quickly became known as the combed yarn capital. So we had 5 mills with a growing population at that time of 5,000 people. The growth occurred primarily as innovations and adaptations of the yarn process. So textiles really became the key component for the city. And very quickly, we had a mill that was rivaling, the closest one was New England. So really that put us on the map as far as fabric and yarn production in the area. And the mills really became the driving force for this area. So we saw industries as early as the 1800s, 1900s. So we're a little bit different than Mecklenburg. We're much more of an industrial area as far as yarn is concerned, and a lot of our agricultural land was sacrificed for housing and for mills and manufacturing in the Gastonia area. Now, Gaston County still had a lot of agriculture, but we were primarily, and I believe it was the 1900s, we were primarily called an industrial area. So we're never really known as an agricultural county, unlike a lot of the other 100 counties within the area or within the state. And the largest mill was Loray Mill, which are from 1900, showing it's boasting 57,000 spindles. So we were definitely on the map as far as textile production, which really became a key component for our country. So from a historical standpoint, our development, and this is something that Rusty had touched on, is that, you know, development is really urbanization. He said, if urbanization is not happening in your community, it will happen. Well, it began, our urbanization began as a byproduct of mill development. And these are a couple examples of mill communities pulled right off of the 1938 historical aerials that we have. You can actually see the development and how it's tied right next to a mill. So within Gastonia and really throughout the region, we still have remnants of mills and mill houses and mill development, where the roads and the housing structure was set up on a grid pattern to align directly with the mill. As many of you may know, and some may not know, the mill really ran the show. They ran the development of your infrastructure. They ran your road systems. They ran the development of of the houses in a lot of these areas in a way to keep their most valuable assets, the people, close to the mill. They didn't want to get them too far away. We want to make sure that our workforce was continuing there. So today we have remnants of a lot of things, a lot of the planning or lack of planning, depending on what to say, that occurred all the way as far back as the late 1800s, early 1900s. The advantage is that a lot of the most downtown and mill communities were constructed by local tradesmen and former agricultural laborers. The reason this is advantageous is, as you know, in the southern Piedmont, our soils are highly erodible land, and we have I believe I'm grateful to be back in the area because we're close enough to the mountains to go and see the mountains. And we're also not terribly far from the coast. We're ideally centered, but with a more aggressive topography than we have at the coast and highly erodible lands, you need to be able to control your drainage. And that is what most of the development that we've seen here in going out on site, a lot of this was accounted for because the developers were they were used to building on terraces, used to dealing with drainage and trying to get the water to go from high elevation to low elevation. So a lot of, even now, going into our older infrastructure, you'll see that some of the drainage ditches were there, even if they're legacy ditches that need to be reestablished. It was at least accounted for, which is positive for sure. So stormwater is also accounted for in municipal infrastructure. The native materials for rock line channel common practices around here was terracotta piping in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We still see legacy piping out there all the way into the 50s. There's piping that has been underground that you know, how do you take old infrastructure and tie it in with new infrastructure? And but many of the infrastructure that was established wasn't considered, the long-term effects weren't really considered on this. Here's a good example of that. This is coming right off of our 1969 maps that we have. This is a utility map. And for those of you who are used to looking at blueprints or utility maps, you can immediately see the issue here. If you're not, and by the way, I just recently took this. This was just a shot I took off of the map. This is a 24-inch terracotta pipe they're just trying to get to drain. And if you notice, it goes under one house, two houses, three houses. So there's actually piping that is under, legacy piping that's under people's houses, not be abandoned. It may or may not be live. This is something we deal with on a regular basis. Now, this one, I noticed that this is, as you can see right here, Firestone Mill. This mill is obviously right next to the grid that we have here. Their main goal is just to get the water away from the mill and down. We have investigated this pipe. It has been abandoned, but you still have old infrastructure under old houses, and there is a life expectancy on some of these things. So if this is, and this house collapses, guess who's responsible? You know, so we have to take all of these situations into consideration on a daily basis. But despite its consideration for stormwater, is, like I said, most of the challenges, they were just trying to move water from high ground to low ground. Unlike much of the country, there wasn't a lot of thought that was given to water quality or water impacts. Gastonia really was no different. This is on Highway Franklin Boulevard. If you come visit the Gastonia, you stop at the Cookout on Franklin Boulevard, which is right near the car lot, the Salinas car lot. This is an old car lot that used to be where the Cookout is, and you can see some of the problems that Duhart's Creek, one of our primary creeks, is here. Had at that time. There's cars that are flooded because of improper stormwater. There was no management that was really given. It wasn't given really a high consideration. Again, just moving water from high to low, and this is Highway 74. This is a main thoroughfare. So, and it's interesting. Real quick, anecdote here that the guy that operates Salinas, Sal Salinas, told me that he used to work at this car dealership before he purchased this, before he became Sal Salinas of Salinas Chevrolet. And he said he remembers that, or Salinas Honda. He said that he recalls that lot flooding all the time in the 70s. So it wasn't just, it was almost every major storm. He said that thing would be underwater. And so it's interesting to see a local businessman have a better appreciation for stormwater control because he's experienced it as a young man. With the introduction of the Clean Water Management Act, though, there was a heightened awareness of water quality. Best management practices started popping up throughout the city. And as it wasn't long before there was a focus on erosion control, land stability, water detention. It became more common in our area. But it wasn't really until 2000 that the city of Gastonia formed its stormwater division under the engineering department. And a year later, we began collecting a fee of $2.75 per ERU. It's equivalent residential unit. So at $2.75, we began with a fee. And the fee was wildly unpopular as there wasn't a huge understanding of why in the world are we charging for stormwater. There was a misconception. So one of our primary things was to begin to educate the public as to why we are collecting a fee and what the role is. With the formation of the department, the city of Gastonia also committed to its citizens to begin following 6 minimum measures with the EPA. And the city of Gastonia's first permit was in 2008. So Gastonia today, and this is kind of going back to something that Rusty had said. If you go back to his slide, and Rusty doesn't know that I was paying attention. I was actually taking notes. But on his slide, it was showing that Union County, York County, Mecklenburg County, and Cabarrus County were the three super developers at rapid growth. Gastonia, if you look at that, Gastonia was just at 20%. It was actually one of the lowest areas that was developed. So why the lack of development in the area? And I believe there was a certain reputation for Gastonia as being more industrial, maybe a higher crime, maybe it had more or less to offer. It was west of the city. In fact, I recall going to the doctor down at the coast, and I told him that my wife and I were relocating back to, I guess, he was familiar. He worked in Charlotte for a number of years, and he called Gastonia the Wild West. So, it certainly had a reputation that was maybe not unfounded at one point, but I will tell you that it is growing by leaps and bounds. And I believe that it has to do with the conveniences. We have 3 major highways that intersect the city. We have a state park right here. There's scenic byways, recreational lakes. There's botanical gardens that are nearby, close proximity to Charlotte. And the growth is we're going at a pace that we have never seen before. And it's actually advantageous to be behind the 8 ball on this and to not have had tremendous growth before, because I believe that we are better positioned to begin to address greater water quality and greater stormwater concerns. Now back to the utilities, you'll notice that one of my slides had mentioned that the city of Gastonia had started utilities during the asterisks on there. And so our utilities really are it's well documented. When you talk to somebody about utilities, it's easy for them to say, they can point to metered utilities, electric. Oh yeah, our utilities, I have to have my utilities turned on. So you have to have metered electric is turned on. And then water and sewer, that's another one of our utilities, but one of the other utilities that we have is stormwater. And stormwater really is the platypus of the utility world. It really is. I always tell people that stormwater is not important until it rains. And then when it rains, it becomes very important. And so we look at our utilities a little bit differently because this is a non-metered utility, and it winds up being very different than any of the other utilities. And our public, I believe our public rightfully demands an answer as to why in the world they're getting billed for stormwater. And I believe we have that answer. We just need to educate. And so when we talk about utilities, we're charging a fee. Our fee was originally $2.75 in 2000. So in 2001. So in 20 years, the fee has moved the needle to $3.75 as of last year. So we really are very low in our utility fee collection. And with the exponential growth, we're going to have fee adjustments for stormwater. A lot of people don't understand why. And here's one of the main questions: how do you bill a fee that can't be turned on or off? Well, regardless if you have an abandoned property or a parking lot, you're to the stormwater, to the infrastructure every time it rains. Just goes back to the slide Rusty had. I see Rusty's not sitting at his desk, which is great. I could talk about it. But one of the slides that Rusty had, when you create an impervious surface, you're putting greater pressure on your infrastructure. Who is billed? The person who owns the property is the one who's responsible for that property. So there again, if you have a rental house and somebody does not want a stormwater bill, we're sorry, you're still responsible for that property and the infrastructure that's out there. We're often overlooked because new construction is approved and even COs the COs are issued, and the stormwater department doesn't get the heads up that, hey, we have a new development that just came in, or a new store that just came in. They've received their certificate of occupancy. We need to know that so we can begin to bill them for their impact on our infrastructure. So these are a few challenges that we face when we do bill collection. And anyone who's ever sat through one of my presentations knows that you have to have a joke at some point during the presentation. So I usually kick off with a joke, but in this case, I'm going to throw it right in the middle here. And I believe that communication. All right, so here's your joke for the day. For anybody that's still listening, you can write this one down. A guy walks into a bar with an alligator. Okay? Goes to the bartender and says, "Hey, do you serve lawyers here?" The bartender looks at him and says, "Well, yeah, we serve lawyers." And he says, "Well, that's great. I'll have a beer for me and a lawyer for my alligator." So in the joke, and I know you guys are rolling with laughter, but we just have turned off all the mics. But in the joke, you obviously see that there's a misinterpretation of what was being asked, and communication is key. So when we enter into communicating with our public, we have to know who our public is. And when you speak of a fee, especially, you're talking to city council, you're talking to landowners, and you're talking to developers and engineers. They all need to know the same thing, the purpose of the fee. And then they also need to know that this fee is actually for their betterment. We're actually putting this fee to work for them, to make sure that the community is safe, that we're accounting for water quality. Again, going back to Rusty's presentation, he had in one of his, Rusty, I've been telling people that I've been taking notes on your presentation. So Rusty had showed that there were the 2 of the 9 impaired watersheds were in Gastonia in Gaston County. So we take that pretty seriously when we're considering how to really honor the residents that are here, and then also provide for better services for the future. So one of the ways that we responded is when we have a fee increase. We had our initial fee increase to $3.25. That $3.25. That happened in 2014. We started something called the Off Right-of-Way program. The Off Right-of-Way program, in a nutshell, is designed to help citizens who have been impacted as a result of previous or current municipal infrastructure. And it could be from a road, it could be from a parking lot, it could be from the fire department or basin or something that the city maintains. If they're being negatively impacted, then we can step in and provide fiscal assistance for them to correct the problem and use some of the stormwater utility fee to put it directly into the hands of local contractors and directly repair some of those impacted properties that have occurred from old infrastructure or maybe just poor planning at some point, or just growth in general. And as an example of this, this is a project that we had. This is a drain that was going under some people's. This was going under some people's driveways. It was a creek that was running through this pipe. The driveway was built over the creek a long time ago, and the impact was such that it began to, the level of water that was coming in from the roads increased the pressure on the pipe. And so what we did is we came in, we installed a slip pipe, we repaired the driveway, and we stabilized it and put an appropriately sized pipe in there to ensure that the water was reducing erosion, was reducing site. Do we still have hurdles to overcome? In the immortal words of the Kool-Aid man, oh yeah, we got lots of hurdles that we still have to overcome. Just to give you a brief rundown of where we currently are today, the city of Gastonia has nearly 78,000 people, and we're growing by leaps and bounds. I understand that Gaston County Natural Resources Department is on the webinar right now, and if you were to talk to them right now, they would tell you that they see development coming in throughout the county, that this number will definitely change by the next census. But right now we just have 3 staff members. We just hired our 3rd staff member in August. So we're getting up to speed to handle the level of people and to handle the concerns that we have. This year we increased our stormwater utility fee at $3.75 per ERU, and we're looking for an additional rate increase in the future because as you know, materials are changing in price, and heaven's sakes, just go to the hardware store and see what the cost of anything is right now. And so as we look at putting new piping in and labor, we need to make sure that we are keeping up with the times. And we have a number of capital improvements projects and off right-of-way projects that we're behind on. We're trying to improve each year. So there's a running list of things that we need to do. So there's always challenges. There's always going to be hurdles for us to jump. But from a post-construction standpoint, as new development comes in, we want to make sure that water quality is being addressed, as well as our own infrastructure. We want to make sure that we are addressing that. So we have I think we're doing pretty well so far. And this is one of the signs we put out to show where money is actually going. So where are we today? Well, the city of Gastonia is making strides toward better and more consistent development. We're taking steps to improve the city and its infrastructure. We do this in a couple of ways, more than just providing an off right-of-way program. We have strong partnerships, which we're very proud of. The Gaston Natural Resources Department and our office has interlocal agreements so that we work together. Stormwater, we have a really good relationship with them. I can boast on them. I worked in my bio. You saw that I worked for them for 15 years. So I have a really good relationship with the Natural Resources Department. A great group of guys. They're very open, easy to talk to. So developers, and I think developers would say the same thing in the area, that they actually help to ensure that everything is done appropriately and in a timely manner. So shout out to the Natural Resources and Regional Stormwater Partnership. I will say this has been I'm not just saying this because I'm the chair of the new members committee, but this is really the Regional Stormwater Partnership is an excellent source for idea sharing, for making sure that we have greater education. We understand each other. Hopefully this didn't bore anyone to tears, this presentation, but even this to show, well, who are the people in your neighborhood? Who are the people across the stream from you or downriver? The phase 2 water quality regulations, we're trying to be more stringent on that. Our 2 and 10 detentions requirements like sand filters, retention ponds, underground proprietary systems. We're looking at all of those things in every new development that comes in. Again, we try to have an open dialogue with our developers and engineers to make sure that whatever's put on the ground is permanent. The decisions that are made on the ground today will impact the future. And our focus is education on water quality and on public health. Again, going back to my joke, which I know you guys are probably still laughing over, the education and understanding of how of communication is critical to ensure that our future is secured here in the county or in the city. So again, education even towards those who are in charge. We need to remind folks that this is not a general slush fund that anyone can dip into. This is a utility fund, and improvements are to be made within our city. So challenges come every time you have new city council members come in. City council are elected officials. They are just human beings that have maybe an 8-to-5 job or retired or whomever, but they need to understand how things work, and it's up to us to kind of guide them and shepherd them towards good decision making on that. Constant outreach, creating partnerships with community and community groups to help move the dial towards the city. This is while the regional stormwater partnership is awesome. We also look at partnering with with a lot of our water quality partners, the river keepers, the local HOAs, people who are in the community and who have a real passion for making sure that things are correct. Are we behind? Of course we're behind. Everyone's behind, but we're moving forward. Biggest room in the world is room for improvement. So in conclusion, which is the slide I started with, we are moving towards a program. We are not ashamed to ask for help. And oftentimes using other programs as a model of what we would like to be is what we do. We're not above suggestions. So if anyone has suggestions, constructive criticism, we're always open to that. And the big is the quality, not just to our watersheds and not just to those 2 impaired watersheds, but again, to look at the big picture that we're looking towards our neighbors downstream. We want to be good stewards to the city and also good stewards to the neighbors downstream. And it's important to remember who those neighbors are. So with that concludes my presentation. Again, I'll be open for any questions at the end of this, but I'd like to thank Regina and everybody for allowing me this.
Wonderful. We're so grateful for your expertise and you're taking time to share today, Dana. Thank you so much. Our next presenter will be Sean Mayo. He's going to be working on sharing about designing post-construction stormwater controls with maintenance in mind. Sean is a civil engineer and a partner with Gavel & Dorn Engineering. He is a graduate of UNC Charlotte and has worked as a civil engineer in the Charlotte metro region for the past 20 years. He specializes in water resources engineering, including stormwater, water and sanitary sewer design, with significant experience in land development. He's also completed hundreds of annual inspections of stormwater control measures for both private and public clients, including Charlotte Stormwater Services. Thank you so much, Sean, for joining us today.
You're muted,
To get
Sean.
you to unmute, Sean.
Okay, so I think I had the visual right, but not the audio. Is that good? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to jump right into it just for time's sake. And, with this presentation, what we're hoping to do is provide some recommendations on how to design and build a more maintainable SCM, and that'll be based on our observations during SCM inspections over the last few years. We're going to begin with a discussion talking about at-grade facilities and then talk about underground SCMs, such as underground detention, underground sand filters. The underground SCMs are really common in the more urban areas, particularly in Charlotte. And it's one where we have seen some significant and some really costly problems due to both design and construction issues. And for all those SCMs, we're going to discuss the importance of access, how to facilitate routine maintenance, how to design to avoid more substantial repairs, and then we'll talk about some common issues at construction. So benefits of good design. What are the benefits of good design? Obviously, the long-term functionality of the SCM is the top priority. But secondary to that, lowering maintenance and repair costs should be a priority as well. So a good design will hopefully reduce the typical maintenance costs, such as the weekly or monthly mowing and the monthly inspections, and also minor cleaning of the SCM. But good design will also reduce the frequency and cost of the major repairs. So the goal is to design an SCM that's accessible, easy to maintain. And if you do that, then there's a likelihood that the owners or whoever's maintaining that device will identify the minor issues before they become a bigger and more costly problem. So we're going to start with some at-grade SCMs. I'll focus on wet ponds, sand filters, and dry detention basins. However, these recommendations can also be applied to stormwater wetlands and bioretention facilities. And with one of the primary concerns with the at-grade SCMs is access. So many of the problems that we see begin with poor access. Poor access prevents good maintenance practices, including regular mowing. Second, the poor access prevents proper inspection on a weekly or monthly basis. So when the regular inspections are not completed, simple problems such as a clogged outlet that could have been easily addressed become major maintenance issues if left alone too long. So what do we mean by access? We want to have easy access to the facility for mowing. We want 3-to-1 slopes or flatter for mowing. We also need to access the entire facility for more in-depth or larger repair projects. So you want to be able to get in there. And we need to be in the proper location so that we can access all of the areas and inspect all of the areas. And I guess a few points to remember about access is that every facility needs maintenance, and some will definitely require more extensive repairs at some point. So if you don't anticipate those future repairs, which would include the use of heavy equipment, then you're just being a little bit short-sighted, and it's going to cost the owner in the long run. Second, if all the sites and all the areas of the SCM are not accessible or visible, then it's certain that those areas will be forgotten about. And when it's not inspected and it's forgotten about, it's going to lead to increased repair costs in the future. So this first slide that I'm showing you, it's a bit of an extreme example, but it's not that uncommon. It's in a dry pond, should be a dry pond, completely surrounded by retaining walls. And what you see on the right is what happens when a facility cannot be accessed. That dry pond has been overgrown, silted in, and major repairs needed because it's been neglected. And in this case, even to get that piece of equipment into the basin required a crane to hoist that equipment into the basin. Obviously, an extremely costly repair to the owner. Second example, similar with the retaining wall surrounding the entire perimeter of a dry pond. Not as extreme, 3 to 5 foot retaining wall, but again, preventing access with mowers, routine maintenance, most likely with not being mowed regularly, possibly the only mowing being done with a weed whacker, which isn't the ideal way to establish and maintain grass. And either way, any mowing on that facility is going to be more expensive just because of the limited access to the facility. So always have an access point. This next example, again, an area where they're really trying to maximize the site with using retaining walls, but what they have done is accounted for access into that basin. And you can see over on this part here, there's a ramp running down into that dry basin that is not being well maintained, that's for sure, but at least they have that access way into the basin so that when they do start to maintain that, the landscaper or the contractor can easily access the site. So that was a good design. This last example is probably something more typical that we see, not necessarily due to retaining walls, but difficult access, and maybe that access not being thought through in its entirety. You can see the gate there in this picture on the left. And to get to that gate, you're blocked by a pedestrian railing, sidewalk. There's just no real clear access for contractors or landscapers to maintain that site. The side slopes getting into there are a little bit steep, and this could have done better. And I'm not saying that that is the only reason this has not for a while, but a proper access way down to this gate would have been the ideal access to that site. So please try and keep that in mind. Last example for access was is a dry pond. On the left, you can see where prior to maintenance, it was overgrown. There was no access to the stormwater outfall, which is just behind this fence at this point. So as part of that retrofit, what they did is they put a gate in there where this yellow circle is. And that gate will allow access to the stormwater outfall. You want to be able to access all portions of the site for maintenance, and included in that would be the stormwater outfall. So regarding wet ponds themselves, there's a couple things that we really need to recommend, that we'd like to recommend for maintenance. First one, dry land access to the riser structure. Second would be an accessible and maintainable water quality inlet. And then, as per any ACRADE device, we want to have complete access, and we want to have 3-to-1 slopes for mowing. So this first example I'm showing you, it has a few different problems with this design that really affect the maintenance. One, there's a perimeter retaining wall that just really complicates access to the site. Two, no dry land access. So it's, when we say dry land, we mean being able to walk to it, hopefully, without getting your feet too wet. This one is out in the middle of the pond. And then three, when you do get out to that riser, what it does not have is there's no access hatch into that riser. So somewhere down in there is a water quality inlet which has clogged, and there's no way to reach it from the top of the riser. So lots of little problems. This pond itself should actually be about 2 to 3 feet lower. And what you're seeing is the pond the water quality inlet is not functioning. The littoral shelf has been completely submerged and has been for a while. And most likely all the plants that are on the littoral shelf are now dead and will need to be replaced, and again, be a big expense to the owner. So for dry land access, what do we mean? The riser on the left would be perfect. You can get it to it from the embankment. That pond is at normal pool at this point, and you'll be able to access the riser and get inside without for inspection and maintenance. The one on the right, not so good. You can see there that there's a lot of vegetation and debris on top of that riser. This is at normal. If that riser had been back in towards the embankment, then either the facility maintenance or the landscaper could regularly clean the top of that device. But in this case, they don't do that, most likely because they'd have to get in up to their knees to get wet. And it's going to be a problem during big rains. Will that inlet, function as it's needed to pass that big storm? The next one we'll talk about is just design of a maintainable and something that can be easily cleared as far as a turn down riser. The water quality inlet are where we see problems most of the times with clogging in these facilities. You have to anticipate that those water quality inlets will get clogged. So how do we address that? This is a good design. It has a PVC, it has access via a clean out outside of the riser structure, also has access from the interior of the riser structure. So one way or another, someone who needs to do maintenance on that facility should be able to unclog that water quality inlet. It's not a perfect design though. Again, this device could be back in towards the shore more, towards the embankment, so that you could reach it with dry land, via dry land. It does have an access hatch into that trash rack, but as it's shown right here, you would need a ladder out in the middle of the pond to reach that rack and be able to get inside of that riser structure and unclog the device. So a lot of good here, but could be improved. Okay, so we're going to jump to dry pond design recommendations. And I think this first bullet point is the number one thing, which is that these dry ponds need to have sufficient slope on the basin to function and allow grass to grow. And we're going to say minimum 2% on that device, on the design to allow for that. Second, we want to have trash racks on all the level orifices. And then, as we've talked about, for all of them, access and minimum 3-to-1 slopes for mowing. So what happens when there's no slope on the dry detention basin? The grass doesn't grow. The area becomes saturated. The landscaper won't maintain it because his equipment can't ride in there, the ride-on mowers, and then the weeds take over. Once the weeds take over, you start to get bare. So you really want to be aware of in the initial design to have at least 2% slope on those basins. And the other part about it is that these basins, you know, once it's constructed, and if it doesn't have that elevation difference between your inlet and your outlet, it's not something that's easily corrected, or can be corrected, I should say, in the field. The contractor, it's going to be the contractor can't account for that grade difference or can't make it up. So it's going to be a long-term problem is what you're looking at here. So always have that slope, 2% minimum. And they'll have a fighting chance of having established grass in there and not have it be a long-term problem for the owner. So if it costs a little bit on the front end, it's going to be a real long-term savings for the owner. Also for dry ponds, trash racks, make sure there's a trash rack on that facility. We see a variety of trash racks out there. The one on the left is not particularly a trash rack, it's more just a screen. The one in the middle is pretty good, has a rebar structure there with some PVC mesh over the top. Could be better. I would recommend at least that be a metal screen rather than the PVC, as it's going to decrease. And then the one on the far right is pretty good. It is a metal screen, could be a little bit bigger to allow for a little more surface area for clogging, but looking pretty good there. But always have a trash rack. Those small 1-inch, 2-inch orifice on these devices are going to get clogged. So anticipate that happening for your facility. This is just probably a more recommended design, similar to what we showed on the previous slide, but could be as simple as a rebar cage covered in a metal wire cloth, and that should prevent a huge amount of the clogging problems. The clogging of a device, especially for dry detention, if you have pooled water in your dry detention pond, you're going to kill the vegetation in there. You're not going to be able to establish grass. So this is all in the goal of keeping your grass healthy in that dry detention. For sand filter design, similar to dry detention, we want to make sure that we have sufficient slope in that basin. Again, we want water to be able to move and not pool on the grass so that it stays healthy. We want to design without sod or stone above the sand filter bed. that will be one thing that a little bit unique and is different from some of the Charlotte typical standards, but we can talk about that and then raise your cleanouts above grade. So when we say no sod or stone topping, what we're trying to do here is we're going to anticipate that the sand filter will need to be repaired or skimmed, if you will, of a sediment layer on the top of that basin. If there's sod in place or if there's stone in place on top of that sand filter, to be able to skim off the accumulated sediment, you're going to have to remove all that stone. So let's just anticipate that that sand filter will need to be cleaned in as part of regular maintenance and remove that. And that facilitates everything for the contractor to get that done. Again, preventing or providing the owner some cost savings there. So what do I mean by the sediment layer? These sand filters, they're notorious for clogging. So again, we're trying to anticipate the problem. This particular facility on the left is under repair, if you will, and they're trying to establish grass. But in the meantime, what you're seeing on the right is a sediment layer built up on top of that sand filter. If there was a stone layer on top of that sand filter at that point, you would have to remove the stone to be able to get in there and take that sediment out. But without the stone, what you can do with a small mechanical equipment, skim off that top layer, replace it with some sand. Hopefully your sand filter is back in working order. This is a simple one. If you do have plastic PVC caps out in an area where a contractor will be mowing, they need to be either raised up above grade, does not hit them, or you could possibly install a cast iron clean out there in the grass, but most likely just raising them up to grade. You can see these 4 in a row have been mowed and the tops knocked off by the landscape contractor. And of course, if the tops of that clean out is not knocked off, then that water is bypassing the sand filter, and that's not what we want to see. So underground SCMs, we'll jump to this. Couple key items: we want to have access to all critical locations, and that would mean the forebays, sand filters, and outlet structures. We want to have full access to both the downstream and upstream side of the weir wall, and we want to have a proper trash guard. And this last one, which is about final inspection, we'll talk about that, but really we want to be take some time to properly inspect that facility before we sign off on it. So access for underground detention. Most times you're going to enter into that facility using confined space entry equipment. And that's what you see there is a tripod and people down in there with emergency recovery equipment, we'll call it that. But also you're going to have vac trucks in there to clean these facilities at some point. So keep that in mind. And then second, limit the distance between manholes to allow for safe access and allow for cleaning. We don't want to have hundreds of feet between manholes. It makes it kind of impractical to inspect and clean. When I say access to both sides of the weir wall, going to be on the upstream side of the weir. That's where you're going to see clogging. And so this one on the left, you do have access to it, but access to the front side of the weir, upstream side of the weir. But on the downstream side, there's no access. And so it's just a little bit problematic. The one on the right, the manhole is over the downstream side of the weir, but there is no way to conveniently access the upstream side of the weir. So that's where your clogs are going to happen. That's where your debris is going to be. And you don't have any, like I say, convenient access to that upstream side of the weir. Another problem just with access to both sides of the weir wall, the one on the left, they've used like a small 4-foot box to make that weir, and it's just a small little channel down there to the downstream side, if you will, that no person can access into. So not very good. The one on the right is kind of hard to imagine maybe, but they have 2 manholes over the top of that weir, and each manhole will allow a person to use that confined space equipment to drop down into that structure on either side and have safe entry and a convenient way to inspect that facility. So trash racks, a big item to discuss with underground detention is that, you know, there will be a lot of trash. If you're in a parking lot, if you're in roadways, there will be floating trash, there'll be heavy sediments, and there'll also be trash such as shopping bags and chip bags and things like that that just kind of don't necessarily float and don't necessarily sink. So we always want to have a trash rack that is over those the water quality inlets, the small 1-inch and 2-inch inlets. And this is the 2 different underground detentions out at the Bojangles Coliseum. You can see the amount of debris that gets in there. So when we talk about preparing for maintenance, you have to understand that they're going to have to get into these facilities probably monthly to clean that debris. So we want to make it as convenient and have a trash rack in there that will prevent clogging in the meantime. Facilities, in particular, the CMP underground detentions for some reason we don't see a lot of trash racks there. And this accumulation of mud and sediment that you see is not uncommon. So we want to have some ability there to prevent clogging of those small 1-inch orifice that you'll typically have in underground detention. So we should never be designing something that does not have a trash rack. Regarding, I'm going to skip this slide for real quick. This is just a proper trash rack selection, but I'm going to jump just because I'm running out of time here to final inspection. This is probably the #1 item that surprises me when I go down into facilities and inspect these systems. As if you're a design engineer, you're most likely asked to sign off on a facility at the very end and say that it meets the post-construction ordinance requirements. And it's amazing how many we go down into, and they obviously have not been inspected in any manner. This particular one, say that it's extreme, but it's really not. It's about 8 to 12 inches of mud throughout the chamber. There's, as you can see there's a wood pallet and debris. This is a major expense to repair and clean to the point where it's a functional stormwater control measure. So the one thing I would caution engineers and recommend to owners is that when you get to the end of a project or about the time that it's being turned over from construction to you, or again, as an engineer, you're signing off on it, make sure that you do a thorough inspection of that facility. Because again, it's probably more often than not that there is major debris in these devices during that first inspection that we complete, that first annual inspection. And owners get a little bit of sticker shock when they are told how much it's going to cost to repair or clean that device. So that would be my one really strong recommendation to engineers, that it's not necessarily maintenance related to maintenance, but as far as anyway, it's just to really, I would really recommend to make a complete and thorough examination of each underground detention structure. And part of the problem that you'll see with those underground detention structures is that when things are underground, I think people forget. And you know, this is just a little example. It's just it's amazing how often that pipes are not grouted. Things are not done really completely and properly when they're underground for whatever reason. So we see a lot of ungrouted pipe connections as well. But anyway, that's what I would that would be the strongest recommendation for the underground facilities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sean, for all these great details and these wonderful pictures. Your expertise really shows and gives us those examples that make a big difference to what people are seeing in the field. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
Our next presenter will be Jay Wilson. He's going to be talking about our construction, conversion, and closeout of structural stormwater control measures. Jay has graduated from NC State University and has 20 years of experience working for Phase 1 and Phase 2 municipal jurisdictions, primarily in water quality specific positions around NPDES permit implementation and management, watershed planning, environmental policy, and construction site stormwater. Currently, Jay administers the soil erosion and sediment control program for the city of Charlotte. Thank you, Jay, for joining us today.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yes.
Good. Good morning, everyone. I'll talk today about construction closeout and conversion of SCMs, with really more of a focus on the conversion part, and really not so much about the means and methods, but more about the processes and maybe some strategies. So I'm just going to jump right into it. So I thought maybe an expanded title might be a discussion of strategies for successfully converting your temporary sedimentation control basin to a permanent SCM or stormwater control measure. I really enjoyed some of the previous presentations that talk about some of the things. I'm really happy to hear Sean kind of put an emphasis on the design side. I'm in the regulatory side at the city of Charlotte, and so we get some input with design, of course, making sure folks meet minimum standards. But to hear this kind of focus on the design side from the design community is refreshing, because certainly it's one of the challenges that we face among many others. So just quickly, I thought it might be helpful to kind of think about why we might be interested in hearing about these sort of things, where I always get purchase in the development community and with owners and operators is the cost element, to minimize delays and costs. But I think it's important to point out, and as many others have put a light on already, that it's not just cost of construction and delays in construction and moving up certificate of occupancy dates, but it's also a long-term cost, a future cost of maintenance burden. So if we can do anything at the front end to help the project progress quickly and minimize future maintenance costs, and that's good. And there's not many places that water quality and development intersect, but certainly timeliness of operations is one of those few places where we have could have overlapping goals. And that's not to say to rush through and do something quickly, because we're leaving some future costs on the table. But certainly if we can do things well and do them quickly, that's a place where environmental and development can find some points of agreement, hopefully. And then, of course, all this is to really promote the most effective service of your stormwater control measure into the future. So I want to mention that this is not an exhaustive discussion. I have a pretty short amount of time for a very boring subject, really, that we could take in many different directions. I know we have a varied audience here. We have a lot of other municipal folks. We have some design folks, and perhaps some on even the construction side. I know I've seen quite a few attendees that I know and work with here in Charlotte. And there's lots of other experts in this audience too. And so certainly some of you are going to say, no, that's not the best way, or we've got a better way, or think about those things. And please, one of the reasons I like to do these sort of talks is to put my ideas out there and hear from other folks. So if you're seeing problems or have recommendations, I'm always interested in hearing how other people are doing it better, stronger, faster. And then, of course, there will be differences by your location and jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions may have a more robust oversight and regulatory program resources, and not as much. So, depending on where you are and what you're doing exactly, there could be some significant differences in the things I'm talking about and the things you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So try to keep that in mind. So I think it's helpful to just mention that, we're in what I would call the post-construction stormwater control ordinance era. So in recognition of the fact that probably many folks here today have been in the industry only since post-construction. There's still many of us who are remember the days before post-construction stormwater control ordinance. And we've talked a lot today about the post-construction side and about the non-point source pollution control side. And certainly I'm coming from a very myopically, erosion and sedimentation control viewpoint. That's my primary focus. But I remember before post-construction when there were sediment control measures were temporary measures. But now in the post-construction era, there are far fewer temporary owned basins. And so, Sean talked a lot about designing these post-construction measures so that they can be maintained and accessed, and all great points and problems we see every day out in the field. One more thing I just want to throw in there is that also please, if you can, consider how those basins will be used as a temporary sedimentation control basin, because often these are going to share the same structural footprint. So embankments and outlet control structures and spillways all can be permanent features on your temporary sedimentation control basin. So even a small portion of the hopefully long life of your SCM, it's the very beginning of the life of that SCM, and how you approach that design and eventual conversion can make a difference in that conversion and the handoff at the initial completion, and how it operates over time and the future maintenance costs. So I think that these factors that I've pointed out here incentivize what I'd call an integrated design approach. And not that I need to tell this group, I think there's many experts and you guys know what you're doing out there, but I just kind of think of this concept of integrated design as the planning and design of stormwater control measures, such that your temporary basins may function at a maximum efficiency within the same footprint of your permanent structural measure, and vice versa, that your permanent structural measure will function efficiently within the footprint of the temporary sedimentation control measure. So it's important to kind of acknowledge the dual use of those, especially during active construction and that period immediately afterward. So, broadly speaking, the big steps, and you've got just a few, you've got the basin closeout and clean out, SCM configuration and construction, and then at the very end is your as-built and turnover. And of course, I'm going to keep mentioning this over and over. It's in a few places in this presentation, is that every step we really want to keep long-term O&M or operation and maintenance in mind. And I apologize if some of this stuff is redundant. I've pulled these slides from many different presentations, and so sometimes some of these end up saying the same thing. So forgive me in advance. But we'll start with the easy part when it comes to the SCM conversion. That's the actual sedimentation control basin closeout. And certainly if you're on the regulatory side and you have some way to exert some influence over the process, any way you can start incentivizing planning for closeout and conversion earlier in the process, I think it'll pay dividends. So of course, whenever we're building whenever building anything, we want to set final grades and establish permanent stabilization. And stabilization, we're going to talk about stabilization a little bit. You can't talk about conversion of SCMs without talking about stabilization. So we're going to spend a couple slides on stabilization after this, but really that needs to be an ongoing and continual process. And that's something from the erosion control side we certainly place an emphasis on and try to incentivize, and it has to be a priority for the construction site managers, operators, and hopefully the design side as well. And then of course, a critical part of closing on a basin is flushing and cleaning the contributing stormwater pipe system. Certainly in urbanized areas, and most even small towns at this point in time have developed stormwater systems and minimum standards for stormwater drainage, and that comprise of stormwater collection pipes, under the street right of ways and to your permanent SCMs, and you've got to clean those pipes out. If you don't, you get a big surprise at the first big rain after completion. And when you have that sand filter combination, that can be an expensive maintenance burden. And then of course, you have to get your, probably your inspector approval for sedimentation basin closeout. So you need to have the regulatory approval or follow whatever procedural steps are required in your jurisdiction of operation. Kind of concurrently with those things, you need to start thinking about getting your materials on site. I'm certainly preaching to the choir. We know that material lead times are getting longer and longer. Things are becoming scarce, even seemingly normal things like paint and concrete. So it helps to kind of be ahead of stockpiling your materials for your under drains, your geotextiles, and any other add-ons, or trash racks, anything you need, screens, anything you need for your permanent SCM that might not already be there. And while you're doing that, it's certainly advantageous to check those materials, especially if you're having to order something that maybe wasn't exactly spec'd against the approved plan, to make sure it meets the design requirements. So just kind of touching again on permanent stabilization, your standards of permanent stabilization may vary by site, by your jurisdiction, by the land use and SCM type. Consider, the importance of permanent stabilization in the drainage area to a sand filter versus a wet pond. Not that one is more desirable, but obviously a little bit of disturbance draining to a sand filter can have a big impact. And you can think about the differences of commercial versus residential, many small buildings versus fewer, or many small buildings with many owners versus fewer large buildings with fewer owners. Seed and straw versus sod, and the seasonality of that, in summer versus the winter. And then of course your jurisdiction of construction. If you're up in or down in the sandhills or the coastal plain, you're going to have different challenges than we have here in the Piedmont. My presentation today is very kind of Piedmont centric, and that's where my experience is. So as always, planning of stabilization is just as important as the design and operation of your eventual SCM. So as those final grades are set, permanent vegetation should be ideally being sowed and grown or planted. And I often see that the final kind of landscape package or final permanent stabilization isn't addressed until we're almost done with the vertical work. So I think it's good to think about finishing horizontal work before your vertical work is finished. So get the outside work done first. Get those permanent grades set. Once your building facade and exterior work is done, you can start establishing permanent grades and converting temporary vegetation on slopes and perimeter areas to permanent vegetation, and that should be something that happens early and often. And of course, you've got to remember to plan around your seasons and weather. So if you've got some brown top millet that is browned out because the first frost has come and gone, and but it's still dense, cover, or it's gotten too cold and it's browned out, that's the time to start thinking about converting that temporary vegetation to permanent. You really got to take advantage of the pieces of the shoulder seasons to grow fescue. So if you're trying to grow fescue instead of a warmer weather grass, then you've really got to be proactive and grow grass in the spring and in the fall. And and if you're not getting enough water, we've had a terribly dry fall here in the Piedmont. If you're not getting enough water, you need to think about irrigation grass. And there's folks that are on this call today that I know have been very successful at running water trucks across their mass graded sites and getting temporary and permanent vegetation to germinate and grow. So it can be done, and it is done to great effect sometimes. And then of course, continually, repairing rills, washouts, and gullies. That's part of that process of making sure that when you get to the end of your project, you have permanent vegetative cover that's going to help make your conversion as easy as possible, not only by promoting infiltration and minimizing runoff, but also by not fouling up your work area as you're making that final conversion. Sorry, my lights keep going off over here. So after that approval for basin closeout is given, and you've created kind of jump through those initial hurdles, it's time to come in that conversion process. So when possible, a pre-construction meeting is recommended, certainly for before you begin any basin conversions. It may be a jurisdictional requirement where you're working, or it may not be. And if it's not, you can still have that pre-construction meeting with the kind of interested parties. So at that meeting, I think it's a good time to review the plans, not only the the plans, the regulatory side plans, the stamped approved plans, the standards, the minimum specifications, but also the construction management side, where we actually talk about the construction plan. Are the materials available? Are they on site? How are you managing access to the site? What about disposal of spoils, or finding import soils if needed, and other sequencing or schedule items that can be relevant or help with the success or failure of that conversion. And then that's a good time to outline inspection schedules and expectations. If you're in a jurisdiction that requires inspections or tests at certain stages of key conversion, that's a good place to get it all ironed out, make sure your contractors are on the same page, or if you're a contractor, that you're on the same page with the regulatory side. And then really in that vein of trying to minimize delays at the point of attack. And the point of attack, is really, I think about that CO issuance. That seems to be the kind of critical moment that everyone's trying to meet, because we need a CO by the state. I was delighted to hear Sean really talk, again and again about the design, the importance of the design. I think it's critically important to include design professionals on these pre-construction meetings. If you're on the design side, I know you probably offer that as a service, and I know many owners probably decline that service. I still would encourage you to try to get involved in some way. Maybe you don't offer any kind of management service, but just at least see kind of how it happens and see how folks are doing things. And that may help you on the design side with that kind of integrated design approach. And of course, I realize that nowadays we don't have enough time for anything, and we have too many demands for everything. So I know that's a stretch to ask for, but if you ever find yourself with that opportunity, please see if you can jump on it. And then of course, the continual problem with construction and solar sedimentation control, and SCMs is the weather and the seasons. And that's where that planning really hopefully pays dividends. If you planned and sowed your cool weather grasses during cool weather times, and they've developed a large enough root system to actually work when to actually grow and become an effective vegetative cover, then you've done well. And if you haven't, then maybe see where you could look to improve that for the next project. So after that pre-construction meeting, now we kind of get into the bones. I'm really going to spend not a whole lot of time on the actual means and methods of doing the work. I'll show a couple things here, but by and large, I think that this is a Zoom meeting full of experts from the names I've seen. And of course, if you want more information about this or how we see things here in Charlotte or Mecklenburg County, feel free to give me a call or talk to some other folks that are going to have good ideas about this. And we've got, I know there's many experts on this call. We've got Heather Davis with Mecklenburg County here, and Jason Klingler. We've got Jerry Jenkins, here in the city of Charlotte. So these are all folks that are doing this work on a daily basis, and seeing it. And there's plenty of room for seeking input from others. Because I'm a really erosion first, sedimentation control first, I thought I would mention just the dewatering aspect. If you've got a pond that has water in it, and you've got to get that water out so you can begin to shape and form the actual SCM, get the geometry right. There's a few ways to dewater that are better than others. In all cases, you really want to try to dewater from the surface if possible to mimic the skimmer drawdown devices, outlet devices that are required by the state for sites of a certain size. If you're unable to do that for any reason, then you can do filter sumps or well point sumps. Those are provide some level of filtration. And then of course, it's helpful if you can, you've got to basically protect the inlet of the pump. So it's not just sucking raw, loose mud from the bottom of the sedimentation control basin. And then you really want to plan your discharge location. You need it to be stable and armored with little or no slope. If you can't discharge directly to the riser and barrel. Now, if you got a floating pump and the basin, the water has already sat in the basin for the minimum time required by the permit or the standards, then you can just dewater right from the top, right into the riser and barrel, and let that water go. It's as clean as it's going to get probably. But if not, you've got to spend a little more time thinking about that thinking about that discharge location. So there's a well point slotted pipe that's actually in a creek for a pump around, but I just thought I'd show a picture of it. This is a good way to discharge if you don't have if you can't get right to the riser and barrel. Now, if this were a final conversion, we'd see grass everywhere. There wouldn't be this raw dirt. This is dewatering for a different purpose. But you see there a dirt bag in use, protected by a couple of layers of silt fence on a fairly flat area. And you can't really see it in the picture, but there is still some sediment in that effluent in the curb down there. But we're removing a lot of it, as you can tell probably by the turbidity coming out. A worse way is just a big pump with a heavy inlet just thrown right into the slop in the bottom of the basin, and do it like that and don't protect the discharge point. You can pretty quickly wind up with significant impacts to the receiving stream. So again, these SCMs are for long-term protection of streams and waterways, and this is just a bad way to start out with that. So the big points about the basin clean out with after you get it dewatered, you really, you've got to dig down a sump, lower that water table and as much as you can, and bring the water out of there. Hopefully you got some time for it to dry a little bit, but then you've got to plan for access. Remove the trash, remove excess sediment, and establish your bottom grades. And that's really the place where, if you have kind of an integrated design approach, so if you've designed it and thinking about these eventual conversions in mind, you may find areas to kind of unlock what I've termed hidden efficiencies. And I would urge you all not to fall into these patterns of this is the way we've always done it, so we're going to do it this way. Really, take the time to read the plan, read the phasing plan, read the construction sequence, see if there is some integrated design elements that may actually make some things easier, or maybe it sparks an idea with your own operations and kind of starts the next best way to do things. To safely remove debris and unwanted teenagers from your basin. There's my joke, Danon. That's for you. Remove sediment. If your sediment is really sloppy and super wet, you should probably think about using polyacrylamides. You've got to consider your spoils locations, and really what you're trying to do at this point is establish your permanent grade on in situ soils or quality compacted backfill. So I'm not really going to talk too much about underground, although we could spend a whole another session. I figured that most of the SCMs are probably still above ground. Even though I would agree with Sean that the most troublesome ones are certainly are below ground, but I'm really trying to cover as much wall with my big paintbrush as I can. So I just started to talk about maybe a few SCMs and some of the things we see: sand filters, extended dry detention, wet ponds. So when it comes to the conversion of the sand filter SCM, you really want to verify OCS and inlets. That should hopefully be done at the initial construction, because hopefully we're building that permanent infrastructure one time at the very beginning of the project. But it's always good to verify that it's like everyone thinks it is. You've got to excavate that filter media chamber and get that material off site, install your underdrain, and establish that uniform and well-drained 4-bay treatment area feed. And I agree with Sean, that you need, if you can have a vegetated conveyance, you need 2% grade across that BMP or SCM. And then to really make it stick, you need to set in that bottom elevation that 2% grade on, hopefully in situ soils. Or if that can't be done, if you had to undercut the site, then hopefully you're getting that on quality compacted fill, brought up in lifts. And then immediately stabilize the work area. So those sand filters are critically important. Sand filters, in my opinion, should really just drain small impervious areas. If I could make my personal crusade here would be to encourage designers not to put sand filters in single family home neighborhoods where there's where there's a lot of lawns, because even lawns are going to produce too many fines, and these HOAs they don't have an idea about what it takes to maintain these sand filters. But obviously, if you are going to do it that way, you've got to really place a premium on stabilizing the entire drainage area. That means not leaving really anything uncovered. And some cautions during sand filters or inspections: the appropriate stage, checking for groundwater influence, having the right perforated pipe with the correct number of holes at the right geometry and the right size holes, correct the geotextiles if you're doing any kind of wrapper linings, non-woven if you need pass through, correct filter media, stable drainage area, and then expediency of operations. Here's a sand filter here in Charlotte that's been crusted over, not because the drainage area is really all that unstable. It's just because the drainage area is primarily turf grass. And if you've been in Charlotte, you probably recognize this sand filter. Extended dry detention, you'll see some of the same elements. I won't go over them again. But really, that extended dry detention, drainage is critically important. So you need that bottom elevation, quality compacted fill or in situ soils, and immediate stabilization of the work area. If you've got to grow grass across the forebay, you can use matting or mulch blankets. The big problems in extended dry detention, I think Sean covered it very well. I'm not going to go over these. The potholes, and poor draining areas, and wetland plants and volunteer plants, and clogging of the outlet structures. And particular attention to the areas immediately around the energy dissipating apron. And then really when you're designing, you really want to use the entire length. So in this particular basin, the inlet comes in a third of the way down the forebay, and the upper third of the forebay will rarely be accessed or provide any sort of treatment for anything. And then wet ponds, kind of some of the same things. Verify OCS and inlet. Your littoral shelf or safety shelf should be built out of in situ soils if possible, and if not, out of quality compacted fill. It's important to pay attention to the permeability of your soils when you're doing wet ponds. If you might need a clay line, or you need to make sure your drainage area is large enough to keep the littoral shelf covered. And if you can't, then you're going to expect some die off of that required vegetation. If you don't plant that vegetation in the correct season, or if your pond keeps drying out or becoming too full, that expensive wetland plants are going to be killed and die off. So then finally, after conversion, you need to survey your as-built condition. Many places require that design professional inspection. And then hopefully you've done this early enough that you can monitor for performance and make corrections and repairs before the final COs and turnover. Ideally, you're providing some sort of warranty period, or if you're in the regulatory side in a position to ask for that or require it, I think it's a good idea. And then I think it's just a good practice to package plans and operation and maintenance documents for handoff to the eventual owner. We're not going to talk about that. The final thoughts, think about the end from the beginning. And certainly I would recommend everyone to finish that horizontal work before you finish the vertical work. Sorry,
Thank you so
very
much, Jay. We really appreciate your expertise in that and helping us to understand more clearly what needs to be done. Our next speaker will be Nate Smith, who's going to share with us more about inspections and maintenance of the stormwater control measures, the requirements, and common issues. We appreciate Nate joining us. Nate is a client service manager with Dragonfly Pond Works. Nate graduated from Brigham Young University with a degree in horticulture management. Since graduating, he has obtained 20+ years of experience in the environmental and stormwater industry. Nate is passionate about the industry due to his love for outdoors, the environment, supporting people with like-minded goals, and his dedication to beautifying and improving communities. Nate brings a strong operational background to the Dragonfly team. He spent a variety of roles within the account manager and regional director of landscape. His experience in design and build, maintenance, sales, budgeting, and contract negotiations. Within his role, Nate strives each day to work with the clients to find joy and excitement in improving our environment. Outside of work, Nate enjoys spending time with his wife and 4 kids, especially while exploring the outdoors. Thanks you so much, Nate, for joining us today.
Thank you, and great workshop so far, great presentations. You guys all hear me okay? All right,
yes,
good.
Yes.
So the focus is just going to be, the surface level. A great insight by many. Sean, I felt a lot from Sean just because we deal with so many of those issues. Undergrounds are becoming, increasingly important throughout the industry. So today we're just going to talk about inspections, maintenance of the SCMs, and like I said, just really surface level. So overview, what is a stormwater device and why do we have one? Basics of stormwater maintenance and common issues, planned versus unplanned expenses, case studies, a few of them in there. Annual compliance, inspection, and certification process. And then obviously we'll take a couple of the questions and answers as we go. Also, you can send me additional through emails, and I'd be happy to look at those and answer those as we go. So as we know, we saw a lot of different on the presentations, different pieces, obviously through runoff, through rain, hitting these developments, these homes, these HOAs, commercial, industrial sites. You pick up a lot of different things, pet waste, fertilizers, motor oils, detergent, chemicals, and litter, which all happens to go into our waterways. So clean water, safe water, recreational water, all are super important through this process. As you see here, there are certain areas that you just can't even swim in because of contamination or other, pollutants in the water. You can't, pull shellfish and harvest those because of some of those pollutants and getting into the water. And so they are super important through the waterways. Stormwater control measures, SCMs, are engineered devices. We should have a specialized for these devices. We work with specialized contractors. That is super important for all the vast different numbers of devices that we do have. Trained in SCM inspection and maintenance, possess necessary specialized equipment, experts when it comes to compliance, properly licensed to apply aquatic herbicides when needed. We always want to stress the when needed. We don't just go in there on a maintenance standpoint and treat when we don't need to, but keeping those clean of algae and other vegetation growth is super important. So some of the basics for the wet ponds, invasive vegetation control. Those cattails that come in, you do want to treat those, make sure they're not coming in, algae and others as well. Specialized mowing around these basins, as Sean mentioned, they are becoming difficult sometimes to get into some of these basins. So clogged drains and leaking structures, trash debris removal, address erosion and bare soil, which do cause issues into these wet ponds or dry ponds. Nuisance wildlife, beavers, geese, muskrats are really the top three pests or nuisance that we really need to safeguard some of these basins from. Issues with the dam, we've seen a lot of muskrats going through the dam, beavers, packing risers, and we do have a couple pictures we'll share with that momentarily. But you see him treating at the top right there with product and chemicals there. Down the bottom right, we've got a couple kind of stress the specialized mowing piece. Some regular mowers that a lot of landscape companies do have are good mowers, but they tend to do more vertical mowing up and down, which cause erosion issues down the road. So Ventrac, that red and white machine there, it's a bit more costly, but the Ventrac machine or a Power Track machine, we have them both. They handle horizontal plane mowing and cutting and really making sure that on those slopes that we can handle and do them more efficiently and effectively. Down the bottom left-hand corner there, he's checking the trash rack, clearing that out from trash, debris, leaves, garbage, making sure that that system can run effectively. Some more basic maintenance needs, buffer management. So when we're talking about littoral plants, good plants in and around the basins, you can see him there. He's clearing some cattails and some other woody vegetation or weeds. Fountains, we maintain fountains and aeration cleaning, super important for a lot of these systems, especially when you're in the recreational realm. Rearranging of riprap as needed. You can see down the bottom left-hand corner. That is considered riprap. Many of you know that, but keeping these free of unwanted vegetation in your inlets, outlets, spillway structure, super important. Don't let woody vegetation grow into those. Inspection of the system components, and then documentation of the pond components. Common issues, algae, plankton, cattails, many of the invasive species coming in, primrose, other. In the top left-hand corner, you can see where some treatment was needed. It's super important to come in and make sure that you're keeping that water as clean and as effective as the right side of the screen there. We kind of willow trees, invasive species, woody vegetation coming into play. That those have to be removed and maintained, and you have to get on a good program to keep those cut out and cleared from these basins. The bottom left-hand corner, we've got a beaver issue there. As you can see, the plugging of the riser, you can see just the top of the riser barely from that beaver packing that riser and really changing a lot of things in that pond, right? From a environmental standpoint, possible dam issues in the future, riser issues, so costly. And so having eyes and ears on that property every month, maintaining wet ponds and other ponds, super important to stay on track, make sure that they're not, they work so fast. So even a month or two, you can have that situation where it's very costly to come in and rectify. Bioretentions and sand filters. Again, many of you went over a lot of these pieces. Sediments can cause the clogging, which that, in the right side there, you can see where Sean was mentioning some of that crust or film or sediment that comes in and lays on top of those filters and really plug those up or clog them. Weed and vegetation management, super important. Skim and refresh the top 1 inch or so annually is what we do recommend. Replace the mulch, these bioretentions, rain gardens. There's a lot of rain garden bioretentions in Charlotte. Some of them are small, but it is important to make sure that those are working effectively. And here's a cross section of them in what they really look like. Just a couple before and after pictures, a couple of common issues throughout. So whether it be large vegetation, weeds, or others that lock up these systems, whether it be maybe sediment that laid in too heavy on some of the non-woven fabric, or the perforated pipe getting clogged, or like Sean mentioned, even those pipes being broken up on top, sediment can get in there into those systems as well. That really to trap or clog some of those systems up. And then down, so that is a bioretention. Just having those clear weeds, okay, on a maintenance standpoint, making sure that you mulch those double, triple shredded mulch, really a tight weave. And a lot of those mulches will really help to keep that mulch locked in place rather than heavier or mulch that will float or move. So that's pretty important on that standpoint. Some of the dry ponds. So dry ponds, very similar to the wet ponds, but they do obviously have a lot more mowing, specialized mowing, weed eating. You have to do this throughout the growing season to be effective. Keep good ground cover, healthy, and trash and debris removal, rearranging some of that riprap, some of the same consistencies with some of the wet ponds. But control the unwanted vegetation always in either one of those wet or dry ponds or bios. Routine inspection in the system components, super important, plus the documentation of that. And that just shows you a close-up picture of the Ventrac, a little bit different machine, but really super important for a lot of these basins to utilize. Here's some common issues for dry ponds. So you can see here before and after, which we did. So you have to maintain that positive drainage. Dry ponds should be dry. We've seen a couple today, and we'll go through a couple more that obviously show the difference there. But you can see where when these basins are not looked after or taken care of, you run into the situation where you have this growth that comes into these basins. Super important to know that it exists, work with municipalities, clients, ownership to understand what that looks like, get those as-built, understand what they should be, and then to what they were developed to be. On the right-hand side there, another one, that dry pond that is locked up, that we're able to come in and rectify as well. This is just a maintenance record that we show, that we provide to clients, sometimes to engineers as they do the inspections or other, they want to see some of the documentation. So important to document the maintenance history on these basins. Great communication tool for, like I mentioned, municipality, engineers, clients. This should include, the photos, visit dates, and description of some of those tasks or some of the issues that we see. The important piece of this too is, if it wasn't for these reports, many clients or others never even see their pond or structure, wet pond, dry pond, so on. They just don't see them. And so this is helping them to see those issues develop. We keep an eye on it. We explain some of the opportunities to repair or fix those items. This is an example of a very costly issue. So this is a dry basin found, here in Charlotte. It was forgotten for many years, such as this is a common, unfortunately, this is common in a lot of Charlotte area. But the municipality issued a notice of violation and needed to see some correction action on those. So shows you before and during, and then we'll take a look at after here. So this is, like I mentioned, that same basin. So it's super important to understand what these basins are supposed to be from the as-built, which many mentioned, and understand some of the elevations, what makes this basin, and how to repair or fix some of those items that come up. So a $30,000+ reconstruction to come in and clear, improve the bottom, to remove all the tree roots and so on, trash. There was just so much trash in these basins compared to just a smaller annual cost. So you really want to, those unplanned costs for R&M budgets for a lot of these multifamily or others can really put a dent in their budget. So the city has always been great working with us, working with clients. So that is always good. Here's another example. Sand filter that just got locked up, was not draining effectively. Are they problems that came from time of construction? Who knows? We come onto the scene and see this and check this out. Again, we get with those as-builts, understand what this is supposed to be. And then, with the out of the compliance piece, it did fail. So we came in and rectified that. And we'll see a couple more pictures here. Found that the problem was the clogged underdrain on this system. So you can see us excavating this sand filter, and unfortunately you have to start over on a lot of these. You have to remove all the media depending on the situation and actual basin, but it does get very costly to do these repairs. This is us just showing before and after basically of a repaired sand filter that we did there. So the stormwater maintenance and inspection program, super important. There is annual inspection each year or need to be submitted to the municipalities, usually done by a professional engineer or sometimes with the stormwater staff. We purposely handle all of our inspections. We do support or we lead them to such people as Sean or other engineers to do some of those inspections. We do not do those in-house by design. So we do have the engineers do a lot of those inspections for us, and that's a choice that we made to do that So you can see from city to city, you know, Raleigh, Durham, Apex, Cary, a lot of them have been kind of ahead of the curve on some of the compliance piece. And for several years. And so I know that Charlotte over the last few years have really dialed that up a little bit. They've had additional staffing and others that probably helped out. And we're seeing a lot more of the compliance piece come into play here in Charlotte. I do cover Charlotte, Greensboro, and Greenville as well. So I get to be in those markets and support them with that. Communication is key. We heard that today is key. And as you see all the different players that come into play with this, I'm sorry about that. You can see where the questions go everywhere, right? No one really understands when they get that letter from compliance, or some people don't even know that they have a dry pond, wet pond, or other. And so just helping them through that process to lead them to individuals, engineers, to lead them to whether they just need an inspection done or to get a proposal to repair those or just start maintenance. So a lot of times they just don't know what those systems are and where to go to get them corrected or fixed. And we're there to help them organize that and work with the different municipalities, ownership, and so on. Summary and conclusion. So enforcement of stormwater regulations is increasing across the board. Stormwater devices are specialized. Key education is the key. And offering construction repair services allow us to better serve our clients. We do maintenance plus the construction for all those, and we do that in-house. So it is all about the people, our clients, but when I say all about the people, our teams are awesome in a way that we can strive to improve the water quality, right, through these systems. That's really what it's all about. And having great people to do that is really the key. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity I had to present today. Additional questions, whether it be right now or send them to me. If I do not have the answers, I can certainly find them for us. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And have a great day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nate. We really appreciate everybody sharing, appreciate your expertise there. We have had the Q&A open and all the questions have been answered as we move forward. So we appreciate moving forward in that way. The PDHs, if you're interested in PDHs, you need to go to the program that was with the link from Zoom and submit the page 5, which is a PDH form, and send that to Regina Geyer at risingsolutionspllc.com. And then we can verify that and get you a certificate. And Chris?
Like I said, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and especially thank all the presenters for sharing their expertise, and thank Rising Solution for hosting and putting all this together.